Velthara stared at the display screen with 3 of her compound eyes while the 4th monitored the backup systems. The readings made no sense, and she had checked them 12 times already. Her chitinous fingers clicked against the control panel as she ran the scan again. The result was the same impossible signal coming from beyond the Crimson Barrier. The Galactic Cartography Station Nexus 7 floated at the very edge of known space, where the last mapped systems gave way to the terrible void. For 3,000 years the station had monitored the barriers that kept the galaxy safe from whatever lay beyond. Nothing had ever come from the dead zone. Nothing ever should. Her assistant Kethlan scuttled over on 6 legs carrying a datapad. His translator device buzzed as he spoke in rapid clicks. The signal was getting stronger and moving toward them at incredible speed. Whatever was out there would reach their position in less than 6 hours. Velthara felt her carapace tighten, with fear. The ancient protocols were clear about signals from beyond the barrier. She should immediately alert the Galactic Council and activate the emergency beacon. But curiosity had always been her weakness as a cartographer. She had spent her entire career mapping the edges of space and had never seen anything like this. The signal pattern was unlike any known technology. It pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost organic but contained mathematical sequences that spoke of advanced engineering. Most disturbing of all, it was transmitting on frequencies that should have been impossible to generate naturally. Her communication array crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The voice that came through was unlike anything in the galactic database. It spoke in a language that her universal translator struggled to decode, but the meaning became clear after several attempts. The voice belonged to someone who called himself Do-Hyun Kim, and he was requesting permission to dock at their station. He claimed to be the captain of a vessel called the Soul Star, and said he was returning from a survey mission in what he called the Outer Spiral. He sounded completely calm, as if traveling through the dead zone was the most normal thing in the galaxy. Velthara nearly dropped her datapad. The Outer Spiral was what the ancient maps had labeled as the absolute void, where space itself was said to be torn and twisted. No life could exist there. No ship could survive there. Yet this Do-Hyun Kim spoke of it as casually as discussing the weather. She activated the station's external cameras and pointed them toward the approaching signal. What she saw made her mandibles clatter with shock. A sleek silver vessel emerged from the swirling red energy of the Crimson Barrier, as if the deadly radiation was nothing more than colored mist. The ship's design was completely unknown, with smooth curves and strange angular sections that seemed to bend light around them. Kethlan was making the high-pitched whistle that indicated extreme distress. He pointed at his readings, which showed that the approaching vessel was not just surviving the barrier radiation, but seemed to be drawing power from it. The ship's energy signatures were off every scale they had. Do-Hyun Kim's voice came through the communication system again. He was asking if their docking bay could accommodate a vessel of his size, and mentioned that his navigator Sojin Park had calculated their approach vector to minimize disruption to the station's operations. He spoke as if this was a routine, diplomatic visit. Velthara realized she was facing a decision that could change everything. The protocols demanded that she refuse contact and immediately warn the galaxy about a potential threat from beyond the barrier. But the voice sounded so utterly normal and non-threatening. Do-Hyun Kim even apologized for arriving without prior notice and explained that their long-range communications had been damaged during what he called a routine asteroid survey. The ship was now close enough for detailed scans, and what Velthara saw defied everything she knew about technology. The hull was made from materials that did not exist in any galactic database. The energy systems operated on principles that seemed to violate basic physics. Most impossible of all, the life signs inside showed that the crew was entirely organic, with no cybernetic enhancements or protective suits, despite having just traveled through the most lethal region of space. She made her choice and opened the docking bay. As the Soul Star settled into the station's embrace with movements so graceful they seemed almost alive, Velthara prepared to meet beings that should not exist. The airlock cycled, and 2 figures stepped onto her station. Do-Hyun Kim was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge that made Velthara uncomfortable. Sojin Park was smaller, with a quick, intelligent face and hands that moved with the precise gestures of someone used to operating complex navigation systems. Both of them wore simple uniforms that looked remarkably similar to standard Galactic fleet attire, except for subtle differences in cut and color. They carried no visible weapons, and their biosigns showed they were completely relaxed. Do-hyun Kim smiled and bowed slightly in what seemed to be a formal greeting gesture. Through the universal translator, he explained that they were explorers from a world called Earth, which lay in what he called the far spiral. They had been surveying nearby systems for possible colony sites when their ship had suffered minor damage. They were hoping to trade for some replacement parts and perhaps exchange star charts with the station. Velthara found herself staring at Sojin Park's navigation equipment, which was unlike anything she had ever seen. The woman noticed her interest and cheerfully began explaining how their stellar positioning system worked. She spoke of pulsars and cosmic background radiation patterns in regions that were supposed to be empty void. She mentioned navigation hazards and shipping lanes in areas that the galactic maps marked as impossible to traverse. Most disturbing of all, Sojin Park casually referenced dozens of inhabited worlds and space stations in the dead zone. She spoke of trade routes and diplomatic missions and survey expeditions, as if the far spiral was just another part of normal galactic civilization. When Velthara asked about the barriers that protected known space from the void, Sojin Park looked genuinely confused. Do-hyun Kim pulled out a datapad and showed Velthara their star charts. The maps were incredibly detailed and showed vast regions of space that extended far beyond the Crimson Barrier. Hundreds of star systems were marked with notes about planets and resources and populations. The charts showed a thriving civilization that had somehow built itself in the space between galaxies where nothing should be able to survive. When Velthara tried to explain about the dead zone and the ancient warnings about the void, both humans looked at her with polite bewilderment. Do-hyun Kim asked what she meant by void, and Sojin Park wondered if perhaps their translation systems were experiencing some kind of error. To them, the regions beyond the barrier were simply unexplored parts of the galaxy that their people had been mapping and settling for thousands of years. The implications hit Velthara like a physical blow. If these humans were telling the truth, then everything the galaxy believed about the edges of space was wrong. The barriers that had protected civilization for millennia might not be keeping dangers out, but keeping the galactic community ignorant of an entire civilization that had grown up in the supposedly impossible regions beyond. As she watched Do-hyun Kim and Sojin Park examine her star charts with the casual interest of fellow explorers, Velthara realized she was looking at beings who had evolved and thrived in the spaces that were supposed to be the domain of cosmic horrors. Either they were incredibly dangerous or incredibly important, and she was not sure which possibility frightened her more. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the Great Chamber, where representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered in holographic form. Velthara stood at the center speaking platform while her data scrolled across massive display screens. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as she presented evidence of beings living beyond the Crimson Barrier. Council leader Morthak floated above the assembly as a writhing mass of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell. His voice resonated through the chamber with harmonics that could shatter metal when he was angry. Today, those harmonics carried undertones of deep fear as he questioned Velthara about every detail of her encounter with the humans. The human, called Jae-wook Lee, sat in a specially constructed chair near the speaking platform. He had volunteered to come to the core worlds as a representative of his people, and seemed completely unaware of the panic his presence was causing. His calm demeanor and casual answers to the council's questions only made the situation more disturbing. When asked about his homeworld, Jae-wook Lee described Earth as a blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star in what he called the local group. He spoke of billions of humans living on dozens of worlds connected by trade routes that spanned regions the galactic maps showed as absolute emptiness. His descriptions of human civilization painted a picture of a thriving spacefaring culture that had somehow built itself in the cosmic wastelands. Delegate Zerthion from the Spiral Coalition demanded to know how many humans existed and what their military capabilities were. Jae-wook Lee seemed puzzled by the aggressive tone and explained that humans numbered in the hundreds of billions across their many colonies. He mentioned their stellar defense force with the same casual tone he might use to discuss a local police department. The questions grew more frantic as delegates realized they were discussing a civilization that might be larger than the entire known galaxy. Jae-wook Lee answered each query with helpful detail that only made things worse. He spoke of human exploration, fleets that had mapped vast regions beyond what he called the inner barriers. He mentioned contact with other species in the far spiral, and trade agreements with civilizations that the galactic maps insisted could not exist. Morthak finally called for a recess and ordered the Council's most senior archivist to attend the session immediately. Zephion arrived within the hour, moving with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who carried the weight of ancient knowledge. His crystalline body pulsed with deep blue light that indicated extreme concern. Zephion had served as keeper of the sealed archives for over 800 years. His role was to maintain records that were too dangerous for general access. The existence of such archives was known only to the highest levels of galactic government, and their contents were classified beyond any normal security level. When Morthak requested access to the origin protocols, Zephion's light dimmed to almost nothing. The origin protocols were the deepest secrets of galactic civilization, dating back to the founding of the first interstellar governments 50,000 years ago. They contained information that had been deliberately hidden because knowledge of it was considered too dangerous for any but the most senior officials. The sealed chamber where the protocols were stored required biometric confirmation from 3 different council members before it would open. Inside lay data crystals that had not been accessed for millennia, along with warning labels written in the extinct languages of the galaxy's founding races. As Zephion activated the ancient storage systems, the chamber filled with holographic displays showing star maps that looked nothing like the current galactic charts. These maps showed the galaxy as it had been known 50,000 years ago. Before the Great Revision that had reshaped all galactic knowledge, the ancient maps revealed that the current galactic civilization occupied only a fraction of the space their ancestors had known. Vast regions now marked as void or barrier zones had once been thriving areas of space filled with advanced civilizations and complex trade networks. The maps showed a galaxy that was 3 times larger than the current charts indicated. Jae-wook Lee studied the ancient displays with growing excitement and pointed out features he recognized from human star charts. The regions his people called the far spiral matched exactly with areas the ancient maps showed as heavily populated space. The correlation was too precise to be coincidence. Zephion accessed deeper archives, and the displays showed historical records from the final years of the previous galactic civilization. The records spoke of something called the convergence event, when massive entities had begun manifesting in normal space. These beings seemed to exist in the gaps between dimensions and fed on conscious thought itself. The ancient records described a war unlike anything in known history. The enemy could not be fought with conventional weapons because they existed partially outside normal reality. Entire star systems had gone silent overnight, as the entities consumed not just the populations, but the very concept of those worlds existing. The previous galactic civilization had possessed technology far beyond current capabilities, but even they had been losing the war. The record showed desperate attempts to understand and combat the entities, including experiments with quantum consciousness and dimensional manipulation that had driven entire research teams insane. The final entries in the archive painted a picture of ultimate sacrifice. The surviving governments had made a terrible decision to abandon vast regions of the galaxy and construct massive barrier systems to contain the entity threat. They had deliberately erased all records of the lost territories and rebuilt galactic civilization in the safer core regions. But the barriers had not been designed to keep the entities contained. They had been built to hide the abandoned regions from the new civilization, while something else dealt with the entity threat. The archives contained references to Guardian, protocols, and successor contingencies, but the details were encrypted beyond Zephion's ability to decode. Morthak studied the ancient maps with growing horror as he realized the implications. The current galactic civilization had been living in ignorance for 50 millennia, while something else maintained the defenses against cosmic threats. The barriers that protected known space were not shields but quarantine boundaries, keeping the galaxy's current inhabitants isolated from whatever lay beyond. Jae-wook Lee examined the records with the calm analytical approach of someone used to dealing with complex historical data. He confirmed that human records spoke of ancient ruins and abandoned technology scattered throughout their space. He mentioned archaeological sites that human scientists had been studying for generations without understanding their true significance. When asked about unusual phenomena in human space, Jae-wook Lee described encounters with what humans called the Wanderers. These were massive vessels that appeared occasionally at the edges of human territory. They never communicated or interfered but seemed to be monitoring something. Human authorities had classified them as natural phenomena since they showed no aggressive behavior. The description of the Wanderers sent new waves of fear through the assembled council members. Ancient records contained references to Guardian, vessels that were supposed to patrol the abandoned regions watching for signs of entity resurgence. If the Wanderers were these Guardian vessels, then they had been operating continuously for 50,000 years. Zephion accessed the final sealed archive which contained the emergency revelation protocols. These records were to be opened only if contact was ever made with inhabitants of the abandoned regions. The protocols revealed that the current galactic civilization was never intended to be permanent, but was a temporary refuge while a new generation of defenders was prepared. The records spoke of a chosen species that would be allowed to develop in the abandoned regions under Guardian protection. This species would possess the genetic and psychological traits needed to perceive and combat the dimensional entities without losing their sanity. When they reached sufficient development, they would take over the Guardian role and allow the galaxy to reunify. As the implications became clear, the council chamber fell completely silent. The humans were not invaders or refugees from some cosmic disaster. They were the chosen species mentioned in the ancient protocols. They had been developing for 50 millennia in the abandoned regions while the Guardian vessels watched and protected them. The galactic civilization that had considered itself the pinnacle of evolution was actually just a caretaker culture, waiting for the real defenders to mature. The humans living beyond the barriers were the galaxy's intended protectors, and their casual attitude toward regions of space that terrified everyone else suggested they were already fulfilling that role. Jae-wook Lee listened to the revelations with growing understanding and asked if this explained why human children were taught about the old ones in their earliest education. He mentioned that every human culture had legends about ancient watchers who protected the galaxy from things that lived between the stars. The council realized they were not dealing with a first contact situation, but with the return of the galaxy's true guardians. The joint expedition ship descended through the atmosphere of New Busan as golden sunlight filtered through clouds that held strange rainbow patterns. Mi-young Choi pressed her face against the viewport, watching the alien landscape unfold below. The human colony world looked deceptively normal, with cities and farmland and transportation networks that could have existed anywhere in the galaxy. Velthera sat across from her, studying scanner readings that showed energy signatures unlike anything in her experience. The planet was riddled with ancient structures buried beneath the surface. Most disturbing of all these ruins seemed to be generating power and responding to the presence of humans in ways that defied explanation. The expedition had been organized hastily after the council revelations convinced galactic authorities that they needed to understand what humanity had built in the abandoned regions. Mi-young Choi had volunteered to serve as xenoarchaeologist and cultural liaison, despite warnings that she might be walking into a situation beyond anyone's comprehension. The landing site was located near a human research station where local scientists had been studying what they called the old sites for several generations. Professor Dal-Soo Kim met them at the shuttle pad with the enthusiastic greeting of someone who rarely received visitors from outside the local academic community. Dal-Soo Kim explained that New Busan had been settled 300 years ago when human surveyors discovered the planet contained ruins that predated human presence in the region by millions of years. The colonists had built their cities around the ancient sites and incorporated some of the old technology into their infrastructure. As they walked toward the main excavation site, Mi-young Choi noticed that the local architecture had an unusual, flowing quality that seemed to blend organic curves with geometric precision. Dal-Soo Kim mentioned that human builders had learned to work with the harmonic frequencies generated by the old ruins, which made construction much easier if they followed certain design principles. The main excavation covered several square kilometers, where teams of human archaeologists worked alongside automated systems that looked far more advanced than standard galactic technology. Velthara noticed that the equipment seemed to be partially grown rather than manufactured, with surfaces that pulsed with their own internal rhythms. Dalsu Kim led them to the central dig site, where a massive structure rose from the excavated ground. The building seemed to be made from a single piece of material that shifted color depending on the viewing angle. Its walls were covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly and seemed to move when observed through peripheral vision. When Mi Young Choi approached the structure, something unexpected happened. The symbols began to glow with soft blue light, and sections of the wall became transparent, revealing complex machinery inside. Dalsu Kim explained that this only occurred when humans with certain genetic markers came near the ruins. Velthara backed away as her scanner readings went completely chaotic. The structure was drawing energy from sources her instruments could not identify, and channeling that power through pathways that extended deep underground. Most disturbing of all, the energy patterns matched theoretical models for dimensional manipulation technology. Dalsu Kim activated a control panel that emerged from the wall when he touched it, and the building's entrance dilated open like a living iris. Inside the structure was a vast chamber filled with floating platforms and walls covered with displays, showing star maps that extended far beyond current galactic boundaries. The central display showed the local region of space, with New Busan marked as a small dot surrounded by thousands of other indicators. Mi Young Choi realized she was looking at a real-time monitoring system that tracked activity across vast areas of the galaxy, including regions that supposedly contained nothing but cosmic void. Some of the indicators pulsed with warning colors, and Dalsu Kim explained that these marked areas where the old Watchers had detected unusual dimensional instabilities. He spoke of the Watchers as if they were a natural part of the local environment, like weather patterns or geological processes. Velthara asked about these old Watchers, and Dalsu Kim described massive vessels that had been present in human space for as long as anyone could remember. They appeared occasionally at the edges of star systems and seemed to be monitoring something beyond normal perception. Human authorities had classified them as benign phenomena since they never interfered with normal activities. Captain Sung Ho Kang arrived at the excavation site in response to Mi Young Choi's request for information about deep space encounters. He commanded a patrol vessel that monitored the outer edges of human territory and had logged hundreds of sightings of the mysterious Watcher ships over his 20-year career. Sung Ho Kang described the Watchers as vessels larger than any human construction that moved through space without visible propulsion systems. They seemed to exist partially outside normal reality, appearing and disappearing without regard for conventional physics. Most encounters lasted only minutes before the Watcher ships faded back into whatever dimension they normally occupied. The patrol captain mentioned that Watcher encounters had been increasing in frequency over the past several years. His crews reported that the massive ships seemed agitated about something and were spending more time in normal space. Some of his officers claimed they could sense emotions radiating from the Watcher vessels, although Sung Ho Kang remained skeptical of such reports. Dalsu Kim led the expedition deeper into the ancient structure, where they found chambers filled with technology that responded to human presence by displaying complex information about galactic conditions. The displays showed dimensional stress, patterns, and energy fluctuations across vast regions of space, with particular attention to areas near the galactic core. Mi Young Choi studied the displays and realized she was looking at a monitoring system that tracked threats the current galactic civilization did not even know existed. The ancient technology was watching for signs of dimensional incursions and maintaining defenses against entities that lived in the spaces between realities. One chamber contained what appeared to be a communication array, with interfaces designed for human use. When Mi Young Choi approached the controls, the system activated automatically and began displaying messages in human languages. The messages were status reports from monitoring stations across human space, detailing the condition of barrier systems and dimensional stabilizers. The communication array also showed incoming signals from sources that registered as the Watcher vessels. These signals contained complex data about dimensional anomalies and warnings about increasing instability in the barriers that protected normal space from whatever lay beyond. Velthara realized that the human colonies were not just settlements built near ancient ruins, but were actually integrated components of a vast defense network that had been operating for millennia. The humans living in the abandoned regions were not just survivors but were active participants in maintaining systems that protected the entire galaxy. Dalsu Kim confirmed that every human colony was built around similar ancient sites, and that all of them were connected through communication networks that operated faster than any known technology. He mentioned that colony administrators received regular updates about galactic security conditions through channels that bypassed normal space-time limitations. As they explored more of the facility, Mi-young Choi began to understand that the ancient ruins were not just archaeological sites, but were active installations that required human operators to function properly. The technology was designed to interface with human neural patterns and genetic structures in ways that suggested it had been specifically created for their species. The most disturbing discovery came when they found chambers containing what appeared to be transformation equipment. The machines could alter human physiology in ways that would allow them to perceive and interact with higher dimensional phenomena. Dalsu Kim explained that volunteers sometimes underwent these procedures to become what humans called bridge walkers, who could travel between normal space and the dimensions where the Watchers operated. Sung Ho Kang mentioned that his patrol logs contained reports from bridge walkers who served as liaisons between human authorities and the Watcher fleets. These individuals possessed abilities that allowed them to perceive dimensional threats directly and coordinate defensive responses across vast distances. As the expedition prepared to return to the surface, Mi-young Choi realized that humanity was already serving as the galaxy's defenders, even though the galactic civilization remained unaware of the threats they were being protected from. The ancient ruins were not just remnants of a lost civilization, but were active command centers for an ongoing war against entities that sought to consume all conscious life. The Watchers were not mysterious phenomena, but were the transformed remnants of the previous galactic civilization who had sacrificed their normal existence to become eternal guardians. They had been waiting for 50,000 years for humanity to develop the capabilities needed to take over their role as protectors of reality itself. Velthara understood that the galactic maps did not end where human space began, but rather marked the boundary between the protected regions where normal life could flourish and the battlegrounds. The deep space research vessel drifted in the void between star systems where normal sensors detected nothing but cosmic background radiation. Hye-jin Nam sat in the specially constructed interface chamber surrounded by technology that hurt to look at directly. Her neural implants glowed with soft phosphorescence as she prepared to make contact with beings that existed partially outside normal reality. The Watcher ship materialized around them without transition, going from absent to present in a way that made the human crew's instruments scream warnings about impossible spatial distortions. The vessel was massive beyond easy comprehension, with surfaces that seemed to fold through dimensions the human mind could not properly process. Hye-jin Nam had volunteered for the Bridgewalker transformation 3 years earlier. After psychological testing revealed she possessed the rare mental flexibility needed to perceive higher dimensional phenomena without losing her sanity. The procedures had changed her in ways that were still not fully understood, but had given her the ability to communicate directly with the ancient guardians. As the interface systems activated, she felt her consciousness expand beyond the confines of her physical brain. Her awareness stretched across dimensions that had no names, touching minds that had existed for longer than human civilization. The contact was overwhelming and gentle at the same time, like being embraced by the galaxy itself. The guardian who spoke to her had once been a being much like humanity, before the transformation that had made him an eternal protector. His thoughts carried the weight of 50,000 years spent watching the barriers between realities. He spoke in concepts that bypassed language entirely, flooding her mind with understanding that would have taken lifetimes to explain in words. The Guardians were the transformed remnants of the galaxy's previous civilization, who had chosen to sacrifice their normal existence rather than allow the dimensional entities to consume all conscious life. They had become living weapons against forces that existed in the spaces between stars, feeding on the dreams and thoughts of organic beings. The war against the dimensional entities was not a historical event, but an ongoing conflict that had raged for millennia in regions of space that normal beings could not perceive. The entities sought to break through into normal reality where they could consume entire civilizations by feeding on consciousness itself. The barriers that protected known space were not passive shields, but were active weapons systems that required constant maintenance and operation. The Guardians had been fighting alone for 50,000 years, holding the line against cosmic horrors while the new galactic civilization developed in the safety of the protected regions. But the Guardian sacrifice had always been intended as a temporary measure. The transformation that made them effective weapons against dimensional entities also slowly eroded their connection to normal reality. They were becoming more like the forces they fought with each passing millennium. Humanity had been identified as the species most likely to serve as effective replacements for the failing Guardian forces. Human neural architecture possessed unique properties that allowed them to perceive dimensional phenomena while maintaining their sanity and connection to normal reality. The Guardian showed Hyejin Nam visions of human colonies that had been unknowingly serving as training grounds for the coming conflict. Every human settlement in the abandoned regions was built around ancient facilities that gradually prepared the population for their role as cosmic defenders. The archaeological sites that humans had been studying for generations were actually command centers for weapon systems that spanned multiple dimensions. The old ones that human cultures remembered in their legends were not myths, but were actual entities that had prepared humanity for their destiny as guardians of reality. Human genetic development had been subtly guided over thousands of generations to produce individuals capable of interfacing with Guardian technology. The mental flexibility and adaptability that humans prized as cultural traits were actually evolutionary adaptations that made them ideal candidates for dimensional warfare. The Guardian revealed that human space was much larger than even human authorities realized, with colonies and outposts extending far beyond the regions shown on their own star charts. Many human populations were living on worlds that existed partially outside normal space-time, where they could develop the abilities needed for Guardian duties. The transformation process that created Bridgewalkers was only the first stage of human preparation for their ultimate role. Full Guardian transformation would allow humans to exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously, while retaining their connection to normal reality in ways the original Guardians had been unable to achieve. But the dimensional barriers were failing after 50 millennia of constant stress, and the entities beyond were growing stronger. The Guardian forces were depleted and exhausted from their eternal vigil. Without human intervention, the barriers would collapse within decades, allowing cosmic horrors to pour into normal space. The Guardian showed Hyejin Nam images of what would happen if the barriers failed. Entire star systems would be consumed as the dimensional entities fed on the consciousness of their inhabitants. The current galactic civilization would be devoured in a matter of years, leaving only empty space where billions of beings had once lived. Humanity had a choice to make between remaining safely isolated in their corner of the galaxy or accepting their role as the new Guardian force. The transformation would grant them abilities beyond imagination, but would also separate them from normal human existence in ways that could never be reversed. Some humans would need to undergo complete Guardian transformation, becoming eternal protectors who existed primarily in the spaces between realities. Others would serve as bridgewalkers, maintaining communication between the Guardian forces and normal human civilization. The majority would continue living normal lives in the protected regions, but would always know they were being defended by their transformed kin. The Guardian explained that human authorities were already aware of much of this information through classified channels that connected colony administrators with the ancient monitoring networks. The decision about humanity's future had been discussed in secret councils for decades while preparations were made for the coming transition. Captain Sung Ho Kang and his patrol fleets were actually advanced scouts for human Guardian forces who monitored dimensional stability and coordinated with the original Guardians when threats emerged. His crews included bridge-walkers who could perceive dimensional incursions and direct response operations across vast distances. The research stations that studied ancient ruins were actually training facilities where human scientists learned to operate Guardian technology and prepared for the responsibilities they would inherit. The archaeological discoveries that seemed to reveal lost civilizations were actually revealing the infrastructure that humanity would soon need to maintain. The Guardian showed Hyejin Nam the true scope of the Galactic Defense Network with monitoring stations and weapon platforms scattered across dimensions that normal beings could not even imagine. The system was vast beyond comprehension, but was failing due to the accumulated stress of 50,000 years of continuous operation. Human colonies in the abandoned regions were already serving as replacement operators for key defense installations. The colonists who thought they were simply living near interesting archaeological sites were actually maintaining systems that protected the entire galaxy from dimensional incursions. The casual way humans dealt with phenomena that terrified other species was evidence that they had already begun adapting to their role as cosmic defenders. Their ability to live and thrive in regions that other beings considered impossible wastelands showed they possessed the mental flexibility needed for guardian duties. But time was running out as dimensional stress patterns showed that the barriers were developing critical instabilities. The guardian forces were too depleted to maintain the defenses much longer. Humanity would need to make their choice soon, or the galaxy would face a catastrophe that would make their previous disasters seem trivial. The Guardians' final message was both a warning and a promise. If humanity accepted their destiny as the new Guardian force, they would inherit powers and responsibilities beyond anything their current civilization could imagine. They would become the Watchers in the darkness, standing eternal guard against horrors that lurked between the stars. But they would also ensure that conscious life could continue to flourish in the galaxy they protected. Their sacrifice would allow billions of beings to live normal lives without ever knowing about the cosmic threats that surrounded them. As Hee-Jin Nam's consciousness returned to her physical body, she carried with her the weight of knowledge that would change everything about humanity's understanding of their place in the galaxy. The dimensional breach opened like a wound in reality itself, spilling impossible geometries into normal space, as entities that had no proper shape began pouring through the failing barriers. Admiral Tai-Jun Yu watched from the bridge of his flagship as space itself twisted around the incursion point, creating patterns that hurt to observe directly. The Guardian forces had held the breach for 6 days, but their ancient technology was finally succumbing to 50 millennia of accumulated stress. Massive Watcher ships flickered in and out of normal space as their dimensional anchors failed, and their crews were pulled into realities where human consciousness could not follow. Dr. Yoon Seo-han worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the research vessel as she raced to complete the Guardian transformation protocols. The process required precise calibration of quantum field generators that could alter human neural patterns at the subatomic level. One miscalculation would destroy the subject's mind while leaving their body intact but empty. The volunteer transformation candidates waited in specially constructed chambers where reality was kept stable through technological means that bordered on the impossible. Each volunteer knew they were about to sacrifice their normal existence to become something that could perceive and fight entities that existed between dimensions. Lieutenant Commander So-Min Park monitored the breach readings as dimensional stress. Indicators climbed beyond anything the monitoring systems had been designed to measure. The entities pouring through the incursion were unlike anything in human experience consuming space itself, as they manifested their impossible forms in normal reality. The first wave of transformed Guardians emerged from the conversion chambers, moving with the fluid grace of beings who existed partially outside normal physics. Their bodies still appeared human, but their eyes held depths that suggested they could perceive realities beyond normal comprehension. Captain Junho Lee led the Guardian forces as they engaged the dimensional entities in combat that took place across multiple layers of reality simultaneously. The battle could barely be observed by normal humans, appearing as flashes of impossible light and distortions in space that suggested vast forces clashing in dimensions beyond perception. The original Guardian forces fought alongside the new human, protectors sharing knowledge accumulated over 50,000 years of dimensional warfare. The ancient beings passed their weapons and responsibilities to humanity as they finally allowed themselves to fade into whatever existence awaited those who had sacrificed everything for the galaxy's protection. Admiral Tae-Jun Yu coordinated the defense fleet as conventional vessels provided support for the Guardian forces by maintaining stable reference points in normal space. The human crews could not directly participate in dimensional combat, but their presence helped anchor reality around the battle zone. Dr. Yoon Seo-han completed the final transformation protocols as more volunteers underwent the process that would grant them abilities beyond normal human comprehension. Each new guardian represented both a victory against the dimensional entities and a loss for normal human civilization, as another defender left ordinary existence behind forever. The tide of battle began to turn as human guardians proved more effective against the dimensional entities than their predecessors had been. Their neural architecture allowed them to perceive entity weaknesses that the original guardians had been unable to detect after millennia of evolutionary adaptation to dimensional warfare. Commander Hyejin Nam coordinated between the Guardian forces and the conventional fleet using her bridgewalker abilities to translate combat information across dimensional boundaries. Her reports painted a picture of a war unlike anything in recorded history, where victory and defeat were measured in the stability of reality itself. The dimensional entities began withdrawing through the breach as they encountered resistance they had not expected from the new Guardian forces. Their retreat was not defeat but tactical withdrawal as they tested human capabilities and prepared for future incursions. Admiral Tae-Jun Yu ordered the construction of permanent Guardian stations around the breach site where human protectors would maintain eternal watch against future entity incursions. The stations would exist partially outside normal spacetime, allowing their crews to respond instantly to dimensional threats anywhere in the galaxy. The galactic civilization gradually learned the truth about humanity's role as cosmic defenders, although most details remained classified to prevent panic among populations who were not prepared to understand the nature of the threats surrounding them. Official history spoke of humanity's contribution to galactic security, without mentioning the dimensional warfare that raged beyond normal perception. New human colonies were established at key points throughout the galaxy, where Guardian stations needed to be maintained. These settlements appeared to be normal communities but were actually strategic positions in a defense network that spanned multiple dimensions. The transformation process was refined and expanded as more humans volunteered to become guardians or bridgewalkers. Each colony contributed volunteers who understood they were sacrificing their normal lives to protect beings who would never know of their existence. Admiral Tae-Jun Yu accepted his own transformation after 3 years of coordinating conventional forces in support of Guardian operations. His new existence allowed him to perceive the full scope of the dimensional defense network and understand humanity's true position as protectors of conscious life itself. Dr. Yoon Seo-han continued her research into Guardian technology and transformation processes while working to minimize the psychological cost of the procedures. Her goal was to allow humans to serve as dimensional defenders while retaining as much of their normal humanity as possible. The original galactic civilization slowly adapted to the knowledge that they had been protected for millennia by forces they had not known existed. Trade and diplomatic relations with humanity expanded, as the galaxy's governments realized they owed their existence to human defenders they could barely comprehend. New star charts were created showing the true extent of human space and acknowledging the Guardian territories that existed in dimensions beyond normal mapping capabilities. The old charts that had marked the edges of known space were revealed as obsolete relics of a time when the galaxy's inhabitants had lived in ignorance of the forces that protected them. Human culture evolved to incorporate their role as cosmic guardians with new traditions that honored those who underwent transformation to become protectors of reality itself. Children grew up knowing that some of their people served as eternal watchmen against threats that lurked in the spaces between stars. The dimensional barriers were rebuilt using Guardian technology operated by human crews who existed partially outside normal space-time. The new defenses were stronger and more flexible than their predecessors, capable of adapting to entity tactics that had evolved over millennia of conflict. Trade routes were established between human space and the protected galactic regions, allowing exchange of knowledge and resources while maintaining security around Guardian installations. Human merchants who appeared to be conducting normal business often served as disguised intelligence operatives, monitoring for signs of dimensional instability. The galaxy achieved a new equilibrium with humanity serving openly as defenders while maintaining the illusion of normal civilization for populations who were not prepared to understand the true nature of reality. Most beings lived normal lives without knowing they were protected by guardians who fought in dimensions beyond their comprehension. The dimensional entities continued to probe the barriers, seeking weaknesses that would allow them to consume conscious life. But they found themselves facing defenders who could adapt and evolve in ways their previous opponents had not been capable of achieving. Humanity had found their place in the galaxy not as conquerors or refugees, but as eternal protectors, standing watch at the edges of reality itself. Their maps no longer marked the boundaries of known space but showed the territories they defended, against forces that sought to unmake everything that existed. The truth that should never be known had become the foundation of a new age where conscious beings could flourish under the protection of guardians who had chosen to sacrifice their normal existence to preserve the possibility of life and thought, and dream in a universe filled with entities that would consume them all.